Hello and welcome to episode number 188. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. Nice to have you with us. This is a premium episode for our premium paying subscribers only. Thank you very much for your support. The toolkit for project managers in the area of Enterprise 2.0, often also called social media project management tools, is vast. We have wikis, blogs, networking tools, microblogging, videos, podcasts. It's a sheer endless list of tools that our project participants suddenly expect us to use and be proficient in on our projects. But where should you start? How should you start? Which tool is appropriate for which task? And almost more importantly, which tool is appropriate for which target audience? These are just some of the topics that we touch upon in our second interview with Dennis Brook on Enterprise 2.0 tools for project managers. We'll even look at the question of, isn't this whole Enterprise 2.0 social media stuff not just simply a gimmick? And how do we get people to change and use the tools properly? And now, please follow me to aisle 7, where we have some great project management power tools waiting for you. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with Dennis Brook, Program Manager and Speaker. Dennis, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back.
So, in our first interview, we looked at Enterprise 2.0, sort of the history and general project management concepts and how to use it, and a few ideas in regards to what it really is. And now we want to jump into some project management specifics here. How to use Enterprise 2.0 tools, what kind of tools are available, what's the best use for them. So, there are a lot of different tools that fall under Enterprise 2.0 umbrella. How do you differentiate them?
Well, I like to think of them as being in a spectrum. And if you think about tools on the left, and Wiki is the tool that I think about on the left, a wiki, like Wikipedia is the most common example, has a lot of detail, but you don't necessarily want to update it a lot. And then if you move to the right, where you have less detail, but more frequency, you have blogs. And a blog is basically just a short bulletin, ideally between 500 and 800 words. And it's an update, or it's an article, or something of interest, but it's something you might put out every day, or if you have a bunch of different people participating, several times a day. Then you move farther on down to the right, where you have even less detail, but more frequency. You have things like networking. You might have LinkedIn in this, or you can even use Facebook, but typically people who are using networking for business are using LinkedIn or a software like that. And then on the very far right, we have what we call microblogging. When you think of microblogging, what do you think of? Of course, you think of Twitter and congressmen who do inappropriate things. But a microblog is basically 140 characters. It's kind of a short bulletin, but it can link to more lengthy content. So it can link to a blog, it can link to a wiki, or to anything. So I always think of, if I want detail, but I don't necessarily want to update it a lot, I start with wikis, and then I move down the spectrum through blogs, networking, and microblogging to have less detail and more frequency.
Right. And just as a reminder to our listeners, the slide deck that you used to give this presentation at the Puget Sound PMI chapter is available as a PDF document. And we were just looking at, I believe that was slide 6, key Enterprise 2.0 elements. I should probably have said this before, but if you look at the slide now, it'll all make sense with the wikis on the left and the microblogging on the right. So let's take a look at these 4 items here, and let's talk about appropriate uses for each of these types. And of course, appropriate use is not general, but appropriate use on a project. So in a project management environment, how would you use a wiki?
So we talked about this a little bit last time, but a wiki is a good place to have a lot of detailed information. And it's really the primary project management Enterprise 2.0 tool I use. So what I'll do for a project is I'll create a portal, project portal, that starts off with the project charter. And from there, I will drill down into more details. So I might link to a risk register. I might link to a project schedule. So a wiki has that information that I need to work with there. Now, on top of that, I can do things like I can set up a project glossary. So when people run across different languages or different terms that they don't understand, they can go ahead and they can look there, or if they find an answer, they can go ahead and create that there as well. And
right, and I think that's an important statement that you've just made. Wikis are here so that everybody contributes. It's not just you, the project manager, who puts in information. It's everybody who contributes to the knowledge that we have about project management in our organization. You may set it up, but once it's out there, once it's public, so to speak, to the project team, everyone contributes, right?
Right, and I always like to say collaboration helps create communications, which helps create community. And like you said, the project manager may set it up or his team may set it up, but you really need to get people to participate because no team is stronger than the individual. You need to bring all the individuals together, and that's what Enterprise 2.0 does.
Let's move from the wiki over to the blog. What would you use a blog for on a project?
Okay, a blog is really a bulletin board, and it's an internal bulletin board, and it's great for things like updates, talking about scope, talking about schedule. And we also like to put fun stuff when we're talking about company. We might talk about company celebrations, and we might talk about the company in the news. And a lot of companies or a lot of big projects, they will do a newsletter. Well, a problem with a newsletter is it's a big production, right? You have to write all the articles. You have to get it approved by the executives. By the time the newsletter is done, the information is stale, right?
Yes.
So the good thing about a blog is instead of putting together a dozen articles, I put out one article a day. And people are busy. They may not have time to read a whole newsletter, but they have time to read a blog article, especially if it talks about some project successes and mentions their name and talks about what a great thing is going on.
Okay. Next, you have here on the list networking. And by networking, we're talking about social networks like Facebook. But of course, that social network would be a internal social network. So a Facebook only within your company, right?
Right. And GE has its own integrated project management or Enterprise 2.0 suite that they use. But those type of things are available to a lot of different companies. What I like to use networking for is to stay in touch with people who might be good team members someday. So LinkedIn is a good example of networking, and you stay in touch with people on LinkedIn. And in fact, one time I was contacted by the Mariner Moose on LinkedIn. And the Mariner
Moose.
The Mariner Moose. So the Seattle Mariners is our local baseball team. And the Mariner Moose was looking for a job in my industry, and he noticed that we had some connections. And he was getting out of the moose business.
Person who is inside of the moose costume.
That's right. Yeah, he was getting out of the moose business. And so he contacted me, and he had a good resume and actually wound up being the runner-up for a position. But the point is you can maintain those networks, and when it's time to bring people in your project team, you can draw on those networks because you know who's available and you know who has good connections and would do a good job for you. Those things exist on the outside, and then you can also set them up inside the firewall as well.
All right. And the fourth and final item here we have is microblogging. So Twitter and things like that.
Right. So I have to confess, I am on Twitter, but I've never used it for project management. Mm-hmm. But it would be really useful to use for trends. So, for example, I went through an integration project, and we were going into an entirely new network, and things were happening so fast that it would not be appropriate to use trouble tickets. There's just too many things going on, too difficult to sort out. We wound up using a whiteboard, where people would put yellow stickies up with what was going on wrong. But if we had used something like Twitter, then they could have put in short problems like cannot access printer, cannot access network, cannot get to email. And you can monitor that stuff and see, okay, what are the trends? Where do I need to focus things so that I can allocate my resources to solve the big problems? So Twitter is like a good status update, and I'd love to be able to use it on a project someday.
Right. Yeah, when it comes to microblogging, I have to admit, I also don't have any experience on using microblogging on a project itself. But what I have seen quite often lately is microblogging being used post-project, so after the actual implementation. Because what happens is if you build a good tool, a good software, a good product, and it's out there in the world and people are using it, they will talk about it on Twitter. And many companies are using that opportunity beyond the implementation to communicate with their customers and also to take these tweets, these notes, as input for trouble tickets. So the trouble ticket software that we use here at the Project Management Podcast, for instance, has this capability. So I could theoretically, if people have problems downloading the podcast and they mention it on Twitter, I could turn that into a trouble ticket and then work with them and help them on the technical side. So that's possible. But talking about podcasts here, what about podcasts? Podcasts are sort of Enterprise 2.0, and they are not mentioned in your presentation. I'm disappointed.
Well, I didn't mean to slight you, but who could compete with PM Podcast?
Oh, thank you.
So, and actually, that's a good point. People want information in different ways, and what I find is that repetition and variety is communications glue. And so, some people want to read stuff, some people want to listen to stuff. And so a podcast is a great way to put out information about what's going on. And podcasts are typically used more for education, like your podcast. So the good thing about a podcast is I can download it. I can be listening on it when I'm biking to work or driving to work. And the same thing is true of video casts. I'll do really short video casts for different groups that I'm working with. And you can post it on YouTube, and you can do the same thing posted on a company intranet. So podcasts, videocasts, all those things are great things to use. And we're talking about the Twitter part. Yeah, Twitter is a great feedback tool. And all these different communications methods are important to get the message across to different people in different ways.
Right. What about the gimmick factor of all of this? I mean, come on. Wikis, blogs, networking via Facebook. In the good old days, when I was still a project manager, I mean, networking, we went to the cooler and we talked at the cooler. Aren't these things, these modern tools, these Enterprise 2.0 tools, just seen as, well, gimmicks, ways that allow us to avoid doing the real work?
Yeah, and I guess people who say that are still using typewriters at their desk too, right? But see, that is a very good point. And some people talk about social media and project management. And I know you've interviewed Elizabeth Heron before,
Yes.
And she has a great book, Social Media for Project Management, for project managers, that I'd recommend. But I like to use the term Enterprise 2.0 because if I use the term social media, what comes to mind? Facebook and things like that. But Enterprise 2.0, it may be the same type of platform, same type of uses, but it's very different. It's serious tools for serious project managers. And once you show people how it works, they realize the value and they'll come along.
Okay, so it's a mindset issue then, right? How do we get people to change from the current thinking, the current methods, and adopt Enterprise 2.0 tools? Do you have a few examples for us?
Yeah, so it is, like you said, it's a mindset change. It's a cultural change. And one of the things you find is if you can get executives to lead from the top, that helps. So more than once I've sat down with an executive and he had sent an email to my project team, said, hey, great job, things like that. So I walked into his office and said, hey, let's share this with everyone and let's share it on the blog. So I walk him through, this is how you get to the blog. This is how you create a post. He types it all in, and then he sends it out to the team. So people see the executive using the blog, which is a really easy to use tool. And so that sets the example. Another thing that I like to do is I like to redirect content. And we've talked before about email and how everyone sends stuff out through email. So I will sit down with someone and say, hey, this is something that really is more appropriate to go on the wiki, or it's more appropriate to go on a blog or another format. So let's put it there so that people can find it easily in the future and so that it's shared with everyone. And we're not jamming up email.
Right. And what you could do in terms of redirecting content, even though that is a bit of jamming up email, is, okay, every Friday we do post our status report and they do go into our Enterprise 2.0 tools, but we will send you an email letting you know that it's been posted, and here's the link redirecting you over to where the report can be found.
Great. And that's an important point, is almost all of these tools have a subscription option. So for example, I can set it up where every time there's a blog post or there's a change to the wiki, I get an email. Or I can say, I only want to see a summary at the end of the day because I want to be focusing on my work during the day, and then I want to get my status updates during the evening. So almost all of these things have some kind of subscription option. And you're right, you can't really depend on them to just go to it. You need to remind them, hey, there's been an update here. But once it's there, they always know they can go out there and find it. So very good point.
Right. In your presentation, when it comes to changing people's minds, you also mentioned fun stuff and you mentioned give up control. What's that all about? How does fun stuff and giving up control help people to adopt Enterprise 2.0 more easily?
So part of it is putting interesting and useful content, but sometimes you just want to have fun with it. So for example, last summer, we had a really hot day in Seattle, which is really unusual. And so we knew that it was going to be hot the next day. So on the blog, we made a posting and said, tomorrow is shorts day. So everyone can wear shorts to the office. We just declared it. So I showed up in the morning. Yeah, it was kind of fun in an air-conditioned office, but it was the fun. So I show up at the office and I go into the break room and one of the pilots is in there. And he goes, hey, dude, you're wearing shorts, because that's the way pilots talk. And I said, yeah, you're right. It's shorts day. And he says, well, I didn't know that. And I said, well, if you read the blog, you would. So more than once, I've made sure that people put stuff only on the blog and talk about it later. And they go, oh, I'm missing out. I better pay attention to the blog.
And what about the last one there, giving up control?
Giving up control is probably one of the toughest parts of it, because project managers like things done a certain way. And there is a little bit of the Wild West when you're looking at Enterprise 2.0 tools, because it's not a matter of typically going through a whole review cycle. It's I put that information out there and I let people go and make comments and make updates. So I encourage people to put stuff up. If people are putting up things that are inappropriate or not really good quality, I will coach them and encourage them. But I realize that I'm not going to go ahead and review every blog posting. I'm going to let people put stuff up and give up some control and encourage them and give them freedom so that they feel like they have control themselves.
Right. You mentioned that giving up control is hard, but I assume it's hard for you yourself personally. So my next question here is, what's the hardest part of getting people to do this? Not from the perspective of you personally, but from a, organizational point of view. So what's the hardest part of making people change their minds and getting them to use Enterprise 2.0?
Yeah, a lot of it is there is a little bit of extra work to go to Enterprise 2.0. So I try to show them the benefit of doing it, say, by a blog versus email. Because I can go up, I can write an email really quick and send it out. Well, it takes a little bit more time to do a blog, right? Because I have to go to that website, I have to go to the write a post, and then I have to go ahead and write it. So it's a little bit more difficult. What I try to do is I try to show people there's significant advantages to using an Enterprise 2.0 tool in terms of being able to find things, being able to organize things. And so a lot of it is face-to-face presentations and really trying to get people to understand that a little bit of extra time on your part will save everyone time, and it will save you time later trying to go find stuff.
Right. You have to be at the forefront of this as the project manager. You have to lead this. But your company doesn't have any of this yet. So you're kind of at a catch-22 position here. I got to know this, but we don't have it. Where do I get experience on this?
This is out here in Seattle. We have a Boeing plant, and one of the most famous test pilots out here was a guy named Tex Johnson. And he did some really wild things like barrel roll a 707 over Lake Washington during a fair. And he had he was quite the guy in his day. But he always said, one test flight is worth 1,000 opinions. And so what I like to do is I like to go out and I like to try stuff out. So if you don't have these tools, if your company doesn't have them, the great thing is that there are a lot of free online tools. And if you're doing volunteer work like with PMI or with the Scouts or any kind of association, there are free options for wikis. There are free options for blogs. And I would go out and use those. You can even use them for neighborhood functions. Create your own blog for neighborhood functions and let people go ahead and post things there. So I like to get the on-hands experience. And then you can go back and bring people in your company information about this. You can even share the presentation that I gave that you're going to make available on your website, because it does talk about this, talks about how to make it work in really easy to understand terms. But try it out, experiment with it. That's really the key.
Cool. Do you have any closing advice for us here?
Yeah, the real key is patience. And you may try stuff out. People will seem to ignore it. And you just have to be patient. You have to really get people to understand that there is pain in email, which is the most common project management tool that can be solved by Enterprise 2.0. And start tracking, like how often are you sending out a status report that you've already sent out, when you can teach people to go to a wiki and find that information, or show them how easy it is to find this information, how it is to share, how easy it is to participate. So patience, show people, and work with them one-on-one to change that culture.
Excellent. Dennis, thank you very much for having been on the program here a second time, talking to us about Enterprise 2.0. Very educational. I appreciate it.
Great. It's a great tool, and I really hope your listeners use it.
And that was Dennis Brook on Enterprise 2.0 tools for project managers. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the Project Management Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching over 38 hours of video training from pm-prepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. You understood what I said, not what I meant. Until next time.